We have been reading about the ends of the lives of some of the greatest Talmudic figures. We looked at the excommunication of Rabbi Eliezer and the death of Rabban Gamliel, these two great leaders, and what this meant for the community. We looked at Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish, and Rabbi Yochanan, their friendship, which ultimately led to their deaths in a very tragic way. That story was very personal about the relationship between those two men. And this story is about the death of yet another great, but it's a very public story. It's the death of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And before we read about the end of his life, which actually, as I've been saying, tells us a lot about his life, let's remember where we are in time. Sometimes I do this sort of review. When was the Talmud codified? When was the Mishnah codified? So if the Second Temple is destroyed in the year 70 CE, and that's when sacrifice ceases to be, and the temple ceases to be the center of the community, and what crops up instead is Torah study. And through that time, along with the fears of maybe losing some of these oral traditions, the Mishnah is written down. The Mishnah, this conglomerate of teachings that really are designed to be memorized. When you study the Mishnah, you see it says, there are 4 categories of this, or there are 6 kinds of that, or, it is still memorized in yeshivas. So the Mishnah is codified, and for every few lines of Mishnah, in the year 200, I didn't say it yet. The Mishnah is codified in the year 200, and the Talmud is codified around the year, 10 points for you, around the year 600 CE. So the Mishnah is in 200. The Talmud, what I was going to say is for every few lines of Mishnah, you have pages and pages and pages of Talmudic discussion. The Talmud covers 6 generations of rabbis, of ancient rabbis. And so the Talmud is codified around 600, although there's still editing happening, even through 700 or 800. But where we are with the story of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is that he is the one who was responsible for codifying the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who is simply known as Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, was the force behind the codification of the Mishnah, which was a radical act, but one that was done in order to preserve an oral tradition that had been passed down from teacher to student, and to preserve a way of Jewish life by category, really, right? That there's a tractate of Sukkah, and there's a tractate of Rosh Hashanah, and a tractate of Shabbat, and tractates having to do with Sanhedrin, having to do with ownership, having to do with every corner of Jewish law and Jewish life. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was the great, Judah the prince, you might translate that. But the Nasi is really the community leader, more than just a scholar, but someone who understands what the community needs, the community looks to him. So there are many layers to this story that we'll look at, and some of it then it rewinds back and forth, but it's so rich because we know that this is a momentous passing for the Jewish community because of who Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was. Yes?
Just a little question. Was it controversial because codifying it made it accessible to people other than the inner core rabbis?
Was it controversial because codifying it made it accessible to more people? I would say no, because still the literate would be a minority. But I would say controversial. Maybe controversial is the wrong word for it even. Transformative. Writing down the Mishnah was transformative because that whole era was about a transformation toward Jewish text study as an end in itself. That was now the way that you could reach God, that you could access the divine through God's word and through the interpretation of God's word. So we move away from sacrifice. We need something to focus on. The sages taught, shall we? I should explain why this is located in the Tractate of Ketubot. The Ketubah is the marriage contract. So many, many times we have stories or even legal tangents that have very little or nothing to do with whatever the matter at hand is. Excuse me. But the goal of the Talmud is not only to present these lively discussions, but sometimes the goal of the Talmud is simply to record things, to record snippets, to record the teachings. And the editors of the Talmud would say, well, we have this teaching. Where should we put it? You know what? This is something else that was taught by Rabbi this or Rabbi that. Let's put it right here. You know, so-and-so also taught. Rabbi Akiva also taught. Rabbi Meir also taught. So in this case, the conversation just previous in the Talmud has to do with how to handle the rights of a widow when her husband dies. She is guaranteed, in the ketubah, she has certain financial rights. So the halacha there is discussed about how her husband's estate still needs to care for her, still needs to feed her and give her housing, and that she is a widow of his family line gives her certain rights because of the ketubah contract, essentially. So tangentially to that, we have a scene where Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is dying and is concerned for the well-being of his wife. That's how the scene opens. Okay? Yes?
What you're saying now, and if it outlines the husband's rights the husband's obligation to a wife if he passes away and so on. In present-day time, when people have a will, does it precede that in terms of civil law and so on?
I don't know the answer to that, actually. I don't know the details of how the financials of ketubah interact with the laws of wills and inheritance. I'm happy to look into it.
So I just want to ask, on that topic, was the dowry after the ketubah?
The dowry is the money that the woman brings into the marriage, and there is some of that remains hers and always remains hers. And but that's separate from but the ketubah is the financial obligation of the husband toward the wife. So, what preceded
all this about looking after the wife?
Yes, the ketubah. So the ketubah is almost I like to think of it as a proto-feminist document. It's a way of protecting women in a culture where women otherwise might not have financial protection, or might not have access to their husband's money.
Did this
So,
carry over to the non-Jewish then? That's what I'm wondering.
it's a Jewish concept. Yeah. I mean, in these days when you read a ketubah, it sounds so archaic. What do you mean he has to provide for her? I mean, this is an egalitarian world. But if you come to any Orthodox wedding, that ketubah is the same text of the ketubah as it always was. And it's in Aramaic so that everyone could understand it. That's why we read it out loud. Okay, but we digress. But this was a digression from that conversation. So now we know what we've digressed from, and now let's see what we're digressing toward. The sages taught. At the time of the passing of Rabbi, it just says Rabbi in the text. Remember, the bolded words are the words that are in the original Hebrew, and the non-bolded are the translator's help. So at the time of the passing of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, he said, I need my sons. Bring me my sons. His sons entered his room. He said to them, as a last will and testament, be careful with the honor of your mother. And then he moves on and says, my lamp should be lit in its usual place. My table should be set in its usual place. The bed should be arranged in its usual place. And these two characters, Yosef Chefani and Shimon Ephrati, they served me during my lifetime and they will serve me in my death. End quote. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to pick apart this statement. First, the Gemara is going to ask about this request that he's making of his sons. Be careful with the honor of your mother. So why is this even necessary? The Gemara is asking. After all, this is required by Torah law. It says, honor your father and your mother. So why, at the end of his life, is Rebbe needing to emphasize this? Of course, they need to honor their mother. Sorry, I'm trying to move the table. Never mind. So the Gemara answers, this was not their mother. This was their father's wife. So this was their stepmother, which they wouldn't have an obligation to honor otherwise. And he is giving this as a last will and testament, take care of my wife. Wait, let's just get through that. Now there's what's called, in Aramaic, it's the shakla v'tarya, a back and forth of the Gemara. So then the Gemara asks, but a father's wife is also required by Torah law, as it is taught in a Braita, that's another teaching that the Talmud is quoting. Honor your father, kabed et avicha, and your mother, ve'et imecha. And it's now proposing a teaching based on this word et being sort of superfluous. It doesn't say kabed avicha, it says kabed et avicha, ve'et imecha. There's no translation in English of the word et. Et is, where are my grammarians? A participle? A preposition of, but there's no way to translate it. It introduces an object of the. Yeah. Okay. Sure. I'll take it. So the preposition et before your father. This teaches that. So et avicha teaches you also have to honor your father's wife, and your mother. This teaches. Et imecha teaches you have to also honor your mother's husband as an extension of the requirement to honor your father or your mother. And then the extra vav, remember it says kabed et avicha ve'et imecha. This is something my older brother always used to remind us. Ve'et imecha adds your older brother. So we're trying to be inclusive of all of the elders of your family, of your at least your immediate family, who deserve honor. So the Gemara then is sort of stuck with this contradiction. Like, then why does he have to command them to honor their stepmother if they're already commanded to do so by the Torah? The Gemara answers, this halacha, that one is obligated by the Torah law to respect his father's wife, applies only during his father's lifetime. While the father is alive, out of respect for him, the wife must also be treated with respect. However, following his death, there's no obligation to honor the stepmother after the father has passed. So for this reason, Rabbi Yehuda has to caution his sons to take care of his wife. Okay, so that's the end of the Talmudic conversation about the very first line. Now, was there a comment, a question? Yes, David.
Does honor mean support?
Good question. What does honor mean, technically? Yes, honor, elsewhere the Talmud discusses what does it mean to honor your father and honor your mother? What does that obligate one to do? And yes, that means support them financially. And also don't sit in your father's seat and don't contradict what your father says publicly. But there are these very specifics. So one should support their elderly parents or their parents who are in financial need. And then the conversation is, well, how far do you have to go? Do you have to put yourself into financial risk? No.
It doesn't include respect.
Yes. But it does include respect. But the halacha is interested in metrics or in specifics. Like, how can I hold someone accountable to a feeling, honor, respect, kavod? That's not a concrete legal idea. So this happens also, by the way, there's another one of the 10 Commandments that has to do not with an action but with an emotion. I'll give you a hint. It's the 10th one. What's the 10th? You shall not covet. You shall not be jealous of, right? Don't covet your neighbor's possessions, your neighbor's wife, right? Don't covet. So the halachic question is, how can the Torah command us with regards to an emotion? How can we be held accountable for that? If I'm feeling jealous? Have I violated the 10th commandment? And some of the commentaries, therefore, I think it's Maimonides and others, I can't remember now, say you haven't violated the 10th commandment until you've acted on that feeling and stolen that object. And then you have violated stealing, and you've also violated coveting. It's very sticky to be able to enforce, to be able to define, simply just to define legally an emotion or respect and honor. Yeah.
This is just a semantic question.
Yeah.
Is there a word two different words for wife and stepmother? Is there a word for stepmother?
Is there a word in Hebrew for stepmother?
Because here it's interpretive.
It's
So, in other words,
the way that we would say in Hebrew stepmother is your father's wife, the wife of the father. Eshet avicha.
So all wives are mothers and stepmothers. It covers.
So it's using the text. This is a very common sort of technique in Talmudic reasoning. It's using the text of the Torah to extrapolate law. And the way it's doing that is by pinpointing a detail in the Torah text that maybe seems odd or superfluous, or we have an assumption that every word is going to teach us something. So avicha, we already learned about respecting a father. So what's ve'et? What's et? Et must teach us some extension of father. Does that make sense? Yes, Florence.
What if the stepmother wants to remarry and the sons do not agree?
That's a Talmudic question. What if the stepmother now remarries? Well, I would ask even before whether or not they like the guy, do they still have an obligation to honor the stepmother, to support the stepmother? Well, it seems that the core obligation was gone once the father was dead. But if their father, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, said, take care of my wife, and then she went off and married someone else, I would assume that their obligation to her is over. Right, now her new husband and his family would have to honor and respect and care and support. Good. All right, so that was line 1. You see, this is why we're going to need 2 sessions for this text. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi commanded his sons, this is now going back to quote what he had said, my lamp should be lit in its usual place, my table should be set in its usual place, the bed should be arranged in its usual place. The Gemara asks, why? What is the reason he made these requests? The Gemara explains. Okay, so this is a little bit mystical. Are you ready? Every Shabbat Eve, even after his passing, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi would come to his house, just as he had been during his lifetime. And so he wanted everything to keep be set up as usual. And then the Gemara has this story, the following incident. It happened on a certain Shabbat Eve that a neighbor came by and called and knocked at the door. And his maidservant said to her, be quiet, for Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is sitting. And when he heard his maidservant reveal his presence to the neighbor, he did not come again, so as not to cast aspersions on earlier righteous individuals who didn't do the same appearance trick. He was coming back after his death to hang out with his family and spend Shabbos dinner together. And when he was found out, he didn't want word to get around, because if he was doing this and someone else was not doing this, it maybe would imply that he was more righteous. So he was concerned for the honor of his fellow tzaddikim. So it doesn't sound very Jewish. What do you mean by Jewish? It's rational?
This is like ghosts.
That's right.
There's a lot in Jewish lore and Jewish tradition about ghosts, about people coming back to speak to someone, or meeting Elijah the prophet on the street. Eliyahu is coming to tell you something. We remember, when we read a midrashic or a Talmudic story, we don't have to ask, is this true? We don't have to ask, did this really happen this way? We have to ask, what is the lesson? What is the pedagogical message embedded in this story? Whether or not Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was there, we don't have any proof. We have this story. So what are they trying to say about Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi? Again, at his death, we can learn about his life. What is it? Why would they insist that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was still around? We're going to see this again at the end of our text. They really, really need him.
Yeah.
They really
Helps him
want...
stay on the moral path or whatever his teachings
They
were.
want him
They need
close
his
by.
presence.
They want his presence. Or maybe, even without that, which you'll see at the end, they insist on his righteousness, right? On his extreme righteousness. He was better than anyone. The rest of them didn't come back to their families. He would even be so humble as not to admit it, that he was the only one. Or what else? What does it say about Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi?
He was like Jesus.
All right, it was already in the air, right? Jesus was back. Everyone can come back. Look, this is during that era, right? This is early Christianity. Paul was not yet really preaching. This is the era of. Well, we don't have a source. It's hard to time the writing of this story. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi lived in the 2nd century. When was this story written down in the Talmud? When was it told or invented or not invented?
But on a personal level, wasn't he also hedging his bets that the sons would not carry out the honor to the stepmother as he would have liked?
Oh, he was coming maybe to check on
To make sure,
his sons.
to make sure that,
Ah,
that there
okay.
was still that kind of cover.
I mean, I'm imagining an empty house where the bed is still made, the lamp is still lit, the table is still set. It's sad, huh? So, the maidservant is still making a living. If she's still in charge, she's still making a living. No, she's still living there, you're saying? But I just went one more. The maidservant. Oh, the wife is still. The wife is still there. Oh, I see what you're saying. Keep it beautiful, just as if when I was there. It's part of taking care of the wife. Oh, that's good, actually. That's I think, very plausible.
So if there are stories floating around of
He doesn't want things to change.
Yes, for his wife. He doesn't want things to change. He doesn't want things to be lesser than. So if ghost stories are floating around.
coming back from the dead, are there actual stories of, say, like empty tombs? No, seriously, because it would be interesting to know if it was part of a tradition of already established legends, or that, and this particular one took,
I mean, we could do a whole series on. Maybe we'll do this. Something about afterlife and people coming back. I've been thinking about doing that toward the end of our course.
Very good. I'm thinking to come back too.
You're going to come back too? Your lamp will still be lit. Your table will be set. Well, there's a lot about reincarnation in the Kabbalistic parts of Judaism. So,
That you have of
Just
your
gonna
late
move this
husband
a
or
minute.
someone who has died, and they come back. What does that signify?
I'm not an authority on dreams.
No, but I mean,
But what could that signify? Yeah.
in a way, this is what we're talking about.
And this maidservant may have been hallucinating and had spread this around. Who knows? I want to move on because there's so much to study. So let's not get stuck too deep in this. Right? Maybe she had a vision, but this is one understanding of why the lamp should be lit and so on, because he's still going to hang around. The Gemara elaborates then on the next part of the statement. Yosef, Chefani, and Shimon Ephrati, they served me during my lifetime, and they will serve me in my death. So what on earth could this mean? These two servants, or...
Carry on the legacy.
Okay, well, you're answering it metaphorically. They'll carry on my legacy. So it was understood from this statement that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was speaking of this world, and the two should serve him in his death and administer his burial. These two, who were my most loyal caregivers, let them also be responsible for the funeral, for the death, for the burial. However, says the Gemara, apparently these two men actually died before Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. When they saw that their beers preceded his beer, did I say that right? Yeah. They died before him. They said, well, it must be that he didn't mean that. He didn't mean about them burying him, because obviously they were they were already gone. They said, conclude from here that he was speaking of that world, that they should attend him in the world to come. Just as they were with me here, they're going to be with me there. Which maybe is a statement of their character, that we're going to be here together in Olam Haba. And the reason he said this was so that people should not say there was something wrong with them, and until now, too, it was the merit of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi that benefited them and prevented them from dying due to their sins. Now that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is dying, his merit no longer protects them, and so Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi therefore clarified that the reason for their deaths was in order to enable them to escort him in death as in life. So it was his way of proclaiming their righteousness. You all know I'm going to have a really good seat in Olam Haba. And you should also know that these two guys are going to be right there with me. Yes.
Yes.
It feels not so Jewish, right? But it's just that it doesn't feel so modern. Forget Jewish or not Jewish. It's not a modern way of talking, because we don't talk vividly about Olam Haba, about the world to come. But they certainly did. And every culture back then did. There was this world and the world to come. And when this world is finished, we still might say, the soul is with God, or there's a world beyond. We don't know, because people don't come back and tell us about it in detail. But think about the way, Dante imagined his Paradiso. That was his Olam Haba, his world to come. So and he was very detailed about who was sitting there and who wasn't, and who was in purgatory and which level, right? I haven't read that since university, but he's applying the same level of detail almost. Like, these two people are going to be with me. Maybe because people might think they weren't, because they were, blue collar workers, right? They were attending to him. All right, I think we're ready for some new material. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi said further to his attendants. Okay, he said, I need my sons. Now he says, I need the sages of Israel. The sages of Israel entered the room. He said to them, do not eulogize me in the small towns, and reconvene the study sessions at the yeshiva after 30 days of mourning. And my son Shimon is a sage. My son Gamliel should be the Nasi. And Chanina Bar Chama will sit at the head of the yeshiva. Okay, lots of different details here that are now also going to be taken apart, dissected. The Gemara explains the request of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, do not eulogize me in the small towns. They understood from this statement that he said this due to the trouble that would be caused for many if he were eulogized in every single town, since they would have to travel from the outlying villages to take part in the eulogies. However, when they saw that they were eulogizing him in the cities, and everyone came despite the trouble, they said, conclude from here that he said this due to the considerations of honor. Had they eulogized him in the towns, the gatherings would have been small and unfit for a man of his stature. He therefore requested that they arrange things in a way that larger crowds would gather. Okay, so why would it be important to eulogize only in the cities and not in the small towns? We would think it was not to be too much of a bother, a tircha, to every little place or organize a funeral. And now his followers are adding sort of an editorial. No, it was also really good. It was really nice that everyone came together, because it meant there were thousands and thousands of people. What a great honor to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. So, okay. I mean, both of these have to do with what? His character, his reputation, the way they want to honor him when he's God. When he's gone. That was very weird. Freudian. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi also said, okay, we're going to keep going. Reconvene the study sessions at the yeshiva after 30 days of mourning. This is because I am not better than Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher. As it is written at the end of the Torah, the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days. So that means that for 30 days they eulogized him by day and night. What ended up happening was, he says, only eulogize me for 30 days and then reopen the yeshiva. Don't make life stop for longer than that. But they felt uncomfortable with that. They wanted longer mourning and eulogizing. So 30 days, day and night. From this point forward, they eulogized him by day and they studied at night, or they eulogized him by night and they studied by day, until they eulogized him for 12 months of the year. They wanted a year of mourning. So what did they find? A loophole. They found a way to listen to their teacher and also honor him the way they felt he deserved. Do you think they were saying he was greater than Moshe Rabbeinu? No. What were they saying? What do you think?
They had a personal relationship with him.
Is that what you were going to say, Marilyn? They felt a connection, a personal
I just
relationship.
felt that they weren't ready to release him.
Yeah, they needed it.
They, as you said before, it was a continuation of your idea. Because with Moshe Rabbeinu, I guess it was declared, and they moved on. They were able to do that. But here they were not.
Mm-hmm. Look, a year of mourning is what we do for our relatives, for our parent. They also felt probably that way about their Rebbe. He was like a father to them, or a guide, or, if we're doing this for my lowly father, how much more so that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi deserves that too. So I'm sure it was that personal feeling. Right, we do 11 months, so we do 11 months of Kaddish, but the year of mourning is a full year. And the reason does anybody know why we only say Kaddish for 11 months? So the belief is that we don't have the idea of a permanent hell or something like that, but that there's a process of purification that the soul goes through depending on how much that person did that needs repenting, that needs purifying, and even the most wicked person, that process lasts for 1 year, and it's meant to mirror the process of the body decaying. That as the body returns to the earth, the soul slowly returns to God, and so we say Kaddish to help that soul rise closer to God, but we would want to say it a full year, but we would never want to say my dear one was the most wicked, right? We want to help them 11 months along as far as we can without insulting them.
But that 11 months is exclusive of the 30 days, isn't it?
It's including 30 days. The first 30 of the 11 months are the Shloshim, yes. So we say Kaddish for 12 months minus 1. Ah, really?
Yes.
It's in Buddhism as well.
Where they have, when a person dies, there's a group of monks that go and help the soul to purify.
For a year?
For a year. Wow. Or I think it's a year, or it could be 30 days, I'm not sure.
Okay, we have to look that up. Wow. Wow.
Of
helping the soul rise.
The soul is not released.
Look, the other purpose of Kaddish is for the deceased, but Kaddish is also for the mourner. So it's both. It's for the process of mourning, of comfort, of letting go, of being in community, all that stuff. All right. So the Gemara relates, on the day of the funeral of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, this is going to be a weird story, I'm just warning you. A divine voice, a bat kol, emerged and said, whoever was present at the funeral of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi is destined for life in the world to come. Like you get to hang on his coattails, so to speak. There was a certain launderer who would come before Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi every day. On that particular day, he did not come and was therefore not present at the funeral. Right? He didn't check the paperman's website. He didn't know, or he just didn't show up that day, and then he missed the funeral. When he heard this, that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had died, he was so full of grief that he ascended to the roof and fell to the ground and died. A divine voice emerged and said, that launderer too is destined for life in the world to come.
This doesn't make sense.
So the launderer felt so...
No, the launderer, this doesn't make sense that he wouldn't know, because in these communities...
Oh, how would he have not known?
Within 10 minutes. Like, I mean, it's unbelievable that he would
Right,
be
word of mouth
unaware
would have been...
that everybody in the community would know. How would he not know? That's
So is it possible that someone of a very low class is disconnected from the buzz of the community? I don't know.
He just did not come.
He didn't come. He didn't come that day, and that's why he missed the funeral. Why did he not come? Oh, you think he knew?
He could have. I mean,
no,
that's not
but
what it
then why
says.
would he be? But what?
It says he did not come.
Well, it begs the question, who was at the funeral? Did they only invite the elite? It says lots and lots of people came to the cities. Everyone came.
Could it not be that he was overcome with grief when he found out that he died, and that's why he missed the funeral?
Oh, he was overcome with grief when he found out.
Instead of going to the funeral, he went up to the roof and died.
I don't know. I think actually there's a lot of ambiguity. If you only look at the bolded words, I didn't bring you the original Aramaic, but if you just look at the bolded words, it's on that day he did not come. When he heard this, he ascended the roof and fell to the ground and died. Did he commit suicide because he heard that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi died? Did he commit suicide because he found out that he missed the funeral? He wanted to be with him and do his laundry along with the other two guys in the world to come. So I actually would connect this story to the other two servants because this has to do with someone who we would think we would dismiss, right? What's the lesson here? We would dismiss this low life. But he was the person who was so connected to Rebbe that he gave his own life. Is that what you were thinking, Farla? That he gave his own life out of grief. And he too must have been such a great soul that he joins Rebbe in the world to come. So it's not about who is or isn't in the world to come. What's it about? How we value human beings. And here we are telling this grand story of the Rebbe who died. But you know what? That little launderer and his two servants were right along with him.
It's a practice.
It's not to dismiss someone of that lowly stature. No?
It's a prelude to Christianity.
It's a prelude to Christianity.
I mean, this is a parable. This is one of
Oh, of course. Well, it's not a prelude to. It was in the air all at the same time, these parables. Yes, absolutely. I know. Well, in school you learned those well, right? I know you're not the only one. Lots of people went to the Protestant school board, or it was a Catholic. I don't remember. I don't want to single anyone out. Okay. So this was the same era, right? We're all speaking the same language. By the way, if you go to the hottest new churches that are playing popular music, God music, church music, evangelical music, it sounds the same as the pop music, which sounds the same as the Jewish cool music, right? There's culture. There's cultural reality. Okay. So let's figure out what he was saying now about his children. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had said, my son Shimon is a sage. And then he said, but my son Gamliel should be the Nasi, the leader. What was he saying? This is what he was saying, the Gemara explains. Although my son Shimon is the greater sage, my son Gamliel should be the Nasi. So Shimon is the scholar, but Gamliel is the leader. Levi said, right, he was the politician maybe. He asks, need this be said? After all, Gamliel was the firstborn. He would obviously take over. Rabbi Shimon, son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, said, it is necessary for you and for your limp. Okay, so the Gemara, so this basically is an insult. The Gemara asks, what did Rabbi Shimon find difficult with Levi's question that he caused him to scoff? Like, why is he insulting Levi for even asking this? Isn't this a valid question? The verse states elsewhere in the Tanakh, right, in the book of Chronicles, the kingdom he gave to Yehoram because he was the firstborn. So it indicates the firstborn is always the one who inherits a father's appointment. So Levi legitimately asked, why did Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi have to leave specific instructions about this? Okay, so maybe Shimon was a little sensitive about the question, but it was a valid question. And Gemara explains, he, in that citation, Yehoram, filled the place of his fathers In other words, he was their equal in his personal attributes and his leadership capabilities. However, Rabbi Gamliel did not fill the place of his fathers. He wasn't the obvious leader. So that's why, even though he was the elder, he would obviously take over, but he was maybe a little bit not as capable as his father. So that's why Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had to specifically command, nevertheless, yes, appoint Gamliel as the Nasi. What's happening here? What's this about at the end of Rebbe's life? The limp, we don't know. Maybe Levi had a limp, but it was his way of saying, it's like, yeah, you and your stutter, you and your limp. You and your, there's another class, Talmudic insults.
Yeah, really.
The best is when one Rebbe says to another, you must have been sleeping when you learned that. Meaning you're telling nonsense. Right. It's just take it as a Talmudic insult.
Okay.
I know, it feels a little random. This is about succession. And the Gemara then asks, and if that is so, if Gamliel was such a schlepper and wasn't really worthy of leadership the way his father was, then what is the reason that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi did this? Why did he choose this son to be the successor if he was unfit for the position? The Gemara answers, although he did not fill the place of his fathers with regards to wisdom, maybe he wasn't so learned, as he was not as great a Torah scholar as his father, he did fill the place of his fathers with regards to fear of sin, and was therefore fit to be appointed as the Nasi. He may not have had scholarship, but he had character. So maybe he had a reputation for being not a great student. But sometimes the politician needs something else. And Gamliel had it. And Shimon, the brother, maybe the bookish type, or maybe because it was the second born, and we wouldn't pass over the first for that. Whatever it was. It's about who takes over, who could ever be Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi.
But he doesn't want the second-born to feel lesser than the firstborn.
But Gamliel is the firstborn, and he's saying Gamliel should take over. Doesn't seem to be concerned with how Shimon feels, but Shimon seems, maybe that's what it is. He's a little sensitive, right?
He was probably treated like that all his life.
Maybe he's always been second fiddle to his older brother. I mean, it's a world in which the elder gets more inheritance, more privilege, more everything. But Shimon was smarter. He was the better scholar, so he feels he should have. Maybe it should have been his.
To be you have to have different attributes.
Yes.
Scholarship.
Yes, I think that's the message here about leadership, that smarts alone is not enough to make a good leader. Was there another comment or thought? We're going to end on this. You see, there's so much more to go. This is so juicy. Okay, last comment. Marilyn, you're going to have the last word. No pressure.
Totally formulated my idea.
Okay, that's okay. Take your time. We started late.
Does this mean that meritocracy takes a second position in terms of ascendancy?
Meritocracy versus ascendancy. Does this mean, well, I think that's a really good point. They're grappling with that. Why would he give it to Gamliel if we want the best person for the job? And Gamliel is the elder but the inferior. So they have to then answer, no. It's true he was inferior in his learning, but he was superior in something that matters more here. So they want to stick with meritocracy even with ascendancy. They want to justify. That's a good way of saying it. Justify the ascendancy. Well, merit. They're trying to attribute merit to the older son.
Although it may not stick right away.
But I think what else is going on here is that nobody could ever be him. He's irreplaceable.
Can you imagine his son having to follow him?
Well, I mean, it happens all the time.
Yes.
I mean, think about, a beloved leader, a beloved rabbi, a beloved CEO, right? How hard it is to be the next one. So at least he's going with ascendancy, because that's harder to argue. You know what? He's the older son. We all expected it to be him. And look at who he is. He's going to do okay.
And look what happened in the Torah with the second son getting the birthright.
Yeah, in the Torah, that's true. The pattern in the Torah is the second supersedes the first, but here not. Yeah, exactly. Again and again. Ephraim and Menashe, everything. All right, we are going to stop here. We'll read more about Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi next week. Thank you so much for your patience.